jump in. You guys are going to see this is all going to kind of tie together, and I want to bring you guys quite a bit of value with jumping through these different ones. So the next one I want to talk about is trailer loading troubles. All right. So some of you guys that follow along, we've got George in. And George, we've been sharing a little bit of information about him. We've been filming an entire case study on George. He's an about 18.2, 18.3 hand Oldenburg gelding. He's a 10-year-old, been in a show, kind of a show type program, adult amateur friendly, really, really sweet minded horse. Came to us, and conformationally, he's not really built the best, and that's putting it lightly. But he is a very capable horse of doing what his owner needs for him to do. And the reason it is important to take into the conformation is because that's how they move. So we have to recognize when we're asking our horses to do things that we're asking them to do things that they can actually do. And basically, George got sent to us because they couldn't get him on a trailer in the last 2.5 years. And so I committed. I said, okay, we'll take George and we'll work with him. So of course I had to get him to our farm. So we backed up our trailer to a round pen, and then I loaded him, quote unquote, at liberty. He didn't have anything on him, and I just kind of flagged him into the trailer. It took about 5-7 minutes. But when we did that, I noticed how unconfident George was in his feet. Like it was kind of sad. Like my wife was like, oh, like that's really upsetting kind of a thing, because what happened was he went to put his front feet in the trailer. The trailer kind of moved a little bit when he went to step into it, as they do. And he was like, he kind of squatted down into this downward dog position with his front feet in the trailer, and then like backed out and like was like, and it was like not quite like a cowering kind of sound, but he was just super unconfident in his feet. And so we're getting to the end of George's training now. And because we've been putting information out, a lot of you guys have asked about helping your horses with your own trailer loading type situations. And when we talk about the theme of this episode is getting to the root of the problem, we have to ask ourselves, is it actually the trailer that is causing the issue? And most of the time, it's not. Most of the time. I'm not going to say never, but most of the time it's frankly because there's not enough quality groundwork with our horses to prepare them for what we're going to ask them to do, which would be loading into the trailer. Okay. And so in George's case, he was very unconfident in his feet. He had lacked proprioception in his body and in his feet. And proprioception being the ability and awareness of knowing where his movement is. And so you have conscious and you have unconscious proprioception. Your unconscious proprioception is the basic movement and awareness of being able to walk, trot, canter out in the field and pick your feet up going over things that the horses will encounter on a regular basis. Think about horses that are raised, and this isn't necessarily George's case, but like think about some horses that might be raised on a flat paddock and a flat stall, never see mud, never see a hillside, anything like that. How good is that horse going to be when you go to try to ask him to walk down a hill? Their body doesn't have the experience, so they don't have the neurological networks built in their body to be successful. Versus look at a wild Mustang that runs up and down hills through rocks and streams and mud and all these other elements. And we talk about how sturdy and how sure-footed those horses are. It's because they have the neurological networks built up in their body, and they have built that unconscious proprioception to be successful navigating those types of things. So when we look at developing young horses, which I spend a lot of time doing, it is very important that we provide them those types of environments so they can build those types of things, because it will affect them in the long term. And if we don't do it early, then we have to incorporate that essentially into their training program, or we have to spend time spending time doing it for them, because it's really important, because this horse, George, is a dressage horse. And it's really important that he has this proprioception, because we have conscious proprioception, which would be then teaching our horses to be conscious of different maneuvers, such as shoulder in, haunches in, a turn on the forehand, a turn on the haunches, backing up. Like if they have good unconscious proprioception, they have a better chance at advancing when we start to then teach them different maneuvers that they wouldn't necessarily do on their own. And with George's case, he just lacked proprioception. I mean, forget conscious or unconscious. He lacked proprioception in general, which means that he was very unconfident in being able to navigate things such as the trailer, because when he stepped on it, it moved. And he wasn't very, quote unquote, sure-footed in stepping in that, so it worried him. Okay? So what I noticed with George was it wasn't necessary. He had issues with a trailer, but it wasn't the trailer itself. It was, he just lacked confidence in his own self because he didn't quite, in the most basic sense, didn't know where his feet were. And so we've spent a lot of time working, doing all types of groundwork over and over and over and over with some basic foundational groundwork exercises in the round pen and in the arena to help George build better awareness. He has to understand the exercises, but then he also has to understand how he can distribute his weight. So I'll do like a half circle exercise, which means I send George out, and when I send him out, he does a turn on the haunches for about 90 degrees, and then he walks forward. And then when I go to change directions, he does another turn on the haunches. And so he's having to distribute his weight from the forehand over to his hocks, make that change of direction, and then walk forward again, be prepared on his own for that next change of direction. We've also done turn on the forehand, which would be yielding the hindquarters over. We've worked on some lateral maneuvers. And then probably the most effective part of this once I have him broken up in the halter, is I took him outside. And I took him up and down hills. I found creeks and ravines. I found logs that were sitting out. And we worked through all over that kind of stuff. And building George's proprioception, building his awareness, and getting him into a thinking state of mind on how he can step to navigate these different obstacles. Spending a lot of time not loading into a horse trailer. And what we found was we did load George into a horse trailer freely first, because I wanted to make sure he's joined us for trailer loading, that he was getting comfortable going in and out of the trailer, but I didn't have him broken up in the halter for me to feel confident, just put him in the trailer. So I loaded him from the round pen in and out of the trailer with him loose. And then the first time we put him in the trailer with him on the end of the halter, no problem at all. But one of the people I wanted to talk to you about was a lady that she's been messaging me privately about her horse, because she has a really interesting case that I think is going to be very, very important. And she reached out because she saw that we have the George case study, and she's like, hey, I want to see this because I have trouble loading my horse into a trailer. And one of the things that she said was, it started off with the horse not being confident with those back doors shutting. And my initial thought was like, okay, sure, maybe there might be a little bit of anxiety, like the trailer doors get shut. But a lot of times, like if I'm going to load my horses into a trailer and shut the doors, if I'm actually going to take them somewhere, I'm going to toss their hay net in there. We're going to close it up and we're going to get on the road and go. But a lot of times I find that people tend to turn trailer loading into a training session. And I think trailer loading is one of those things that we need to make sure our horses do it. But we don't want to just harp on trailer loading. We don't want to harp on anything, because we want to be able to train our horse in a versatile type of way that they're gaining the skills and the experiences in a variety of ways. That way they're set up for success, just like George. Like I took him down creeks and hills and ravines and over logs and stuff in the name of trailer loading, knowing that it was going to help him with his trailer loading, but I didn't practice trailer loading. And so a lot of times people want to make sure their horse is good at trailer loading, so they do trailer loading, and then they create an issue where there may not have ever been an issue in the first place. And so in this case, she was like, at first our conversation was like, hey, he's really unsure about these doors shutting. And I was like, hey, that's legitimate. I understand. But I said, go back and watch the video that I put up of George and talk about how I'm working with the horse on the ground beforehand. And one comment she made in that initial message says, well, I could take him on a trip for his own, I want to take him on a short trip just to let him get experience. And I told her, I was like, I'm actually a pretty big fan of hauling my horses longer distance on those, so they have time to settle in, because a lot of the principles that I picked up from one of my good friends, and that when you start allowing on horses, you'll see is that sometimes relaxation is the name of the game. And sometimes when we're working with our horses trying to get them relaxed, we can start with that, and then say we ask them to trot, ask a green colt to trot. They might get a little tight. So what are we going to do? Well, if they're getting ready to buck, we're going to slow them down, bring them back, say, hey, that's not quite the mindset we want. We want you to relax. We want you to breathe, and then we'll try again. But if a horse is kind of going around, but they're a little choppy, they're a little unbalanced because they're a little tight, but yet they're going on, we might go until they start to breathe. You guys might be riding your horses and I ask them to trot, and then you start to hear them exhale and they blow through their nose a lot. That's those horses moving until they start to relax. And so I use that same principle when I go to trailer load my horses a lot of times, is that when I go to take them on a trip, I like to take them go somewhere for a couple hours. That way, if we go to start to move and we go down the road and they get a little bit nervous, they have time to settle in and they get their trailer legs, let's call it, right? And they can settle in and they can get comfortable in that trailer. And so a lot of times when people are having trailer loading issues, I tell people, like, once you get them good going in and out of a trailer and you're going to take them somewhere, go somewhere. Don't just take them 15 minutes around the block to go get some ice cream and then come back. Why? Because oftentimes you don't go far enough and they get just worried enough in the trailer, and then you take them off because the ride's over and they haven't had time to settle in. Well, so here's what ended up happening with this situation. And she worked with him for a couple days on the trailer loading, and then she decided to take him on like an hour and a half long trip. And she got him home, and unfortunately, he was lathered, soaking wet, and very, very anxious about the whole thing. All right, which is, I feel really bad for the horse. I felt bad for her. She felt bad for him. She was like, what do I do wrong? Can you help me? And of course, because all this is over Facebook Messenger, and I'm just answering questions as I can to help her out. And so I'm going to try to find the part in the message that really stuck out to me, because when I read it, it gave me direct insight to what was going on. And this is something that's really, really important to realize, is that she said in here, let me find it so I make sure I get the right words. Here it is. He loads perfectly in the trailer, but gets highly anxious being in the trailer alone and with the rear doors shut, or the rear doors closed. And so when I read that, that was just a part of a bigger message. And it said, he loads perfectly, but gets highly anxious being in the trailer alone with the rear doors closed. And initially the issue was the rear doors. But when I reread that, and that was something that her and I talked about, but when I reread that, and I was like, hey, let's think about this for a second. And I sent her back a question. I said, how does he do when he's alone without the trailer being involved, whether that's in a stall when no one else is in the barn, or perhaps tied up by himself when other horses are elsewhere? How does he do then? And she came back and said, great question. I've never really had him alone, because I board, and there's about 40 horses in various pastures pretty much all the time. You're thinking separation anxiety triggered by isolation in the trailer. That fits. So, getting to the root of the problem, this horse was trailer loading just fine. They started to notice he would get anxious about the time that the rear doors closed. But it probably didn't have anything to do with the rear doors closing, okay? She said the answer to the problem in her own question, which basically said, this horse had a separation anxiety because they're herd animals. So it's very understandable, but that they would have this struggle, right? But we have to understand, if we're going to trailer load our horses and they're going to haul alone, we have to know that they can be comfortable being by themselves, which means, like, for what we do at our place, we will tie our horses up before and after we ride them. So we'll tie them up so we can groom them off, and they'll stand there. And sometimes there's a buddy tied out down in the barn aisle down the way, or sometimes they're there by themselves. And then after we work them, we let them hang out If they're sweaty, they dry off, or if we hosed them or whatever. But all of our horses spend time being tied up. And one, because they got to tie in the trailer. And two, they'll all at some point experience being alone. And particularly if I have a horse that I know is super anxious and is very impatient and isn't comfortable spending time by themselves and being alone, then I'm going to make sure that we address that, because one, you don't need them digging a hole to China if they're tied up. And two, for a trailer loading type situation like this horse had a rough experience in the trailer, but it wasn't necessarily based on the way I've perceived it at this point, based on the information I have. What had nothing to do with the fact that he was anxious about the trailer is the fact that he was tore up because he didn't have any friends or buddies in there with him. And I think about this. I'm like, okay, well, you look at these horses that, say the wild Mustangs, they round them up out west and they put them in trailers and they haul them across the country. I've been there when they've arrived. They're fine. But they have 20 or 30 of them in the trailer. And they're all together. So they have companionship in there. They have comfort in a herd. Whereas now we've taken a herd animal, put them in a box by themselves and said, you're good. Sometimes they're not good if we haven't given them those experiences ahead of time. So in your trailer loading situations, what's the root of the problem? If you're having trouble with the trailer loading, is it your groundwork? Is it them being understanding, confident in their feet? Are they prepared to then be able to be by themselves? Can you tie them up for a while by themselves? We have to, with anything, I strip down all of the pieces of the puzzle, whether I'm going to go show a horse or whether I'm dealing with a problem that has been created or has arisen. I want to break down all these pieces, and I want to get down to the base layer and that foundation. And I want to look at it from the horse's perspective. And I want to say, what is this horse really thinking? How do they really feel about what's going on? How is it being presented? What is being presented to the horse? And break down all of these pieces, because we need a strong product. We need a strong foundation. We need a strong understanding, great confidence, and ultimately a partnership with our horses at the end of the day. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we're looking at this not just from our perspective, right? And we have to strip the emotions out of it, and we got to be factual about this. And there's feelings involved, but most of the feelings that I think need to be taken into consideration are the feelings of your horse. And then recognize those and say, how do we need to deal with those? Are they good feelings? Are they not so good feelings? Do they result in wanted behaviors or unwanted behaviors, right? But guys, that's how I strip down the trailer loading. That is a very real example that a couple of examples that we've dealt with trailer loading, and that's how I'm going to get to the root of the issue on those. Now,